So, first of all, everybody, welcome to the live about mostly the Great Depression. We are obviously right now in the midst of a global economic recession. It's already been called a recession. It's known, it's here, and it's here to stay. We don't know for how long, we don't know how big, we don't know how much. But the only thing that we can do is to learn and to do our very best studying, and the only thing that we can do is to study and learn from history. Learning from history is the most powerful thing that we can do. Okay, so today I'm going to introduce myself a little bit, very shortly. Then I'm going to make an introduction basically of what am I going to go over today, and then I'm going to dive right into it. I'm not great at how do you say, this is a new thing to me, the live thing. And meaning videos I know how to do, and public speaking is definitely my thing. As people come along, forgive me if I'm not greeting you. So I greet everybody right now. Welcome everybody, whoever is going to join us in the next coming hour or so. And I'm going to dive right into it. My name is Yishai Breslauer. I'm a real estate guy. I basically, for the past 2 years, I'm running a company that does deals in the New York area, the Connecticut area, and the Ohio area. I'm focusing on commercial real estate, different sectors. Not going to get into it right now. It's not our topic. I'm also involved in prop tech, what we call real estate technology startups, and that's me. What are we going to speak about today? What are we going to talk about today? I think it's very exciting stuff and very interesting stuff, and a bit, unfortunately, terrifying. But we have to know what's ahead of us in order to know how to act. What should we do? How do we approach this? What opportunities are going to be out there? And that's going to be my next live, by the way. What type of opportunities, especially in real estate, are going to come out there? But right now, let's focus on the crisis. We have a coronavirus crisis that struck us. It's a new thing for everybody. Everybody's trying to grasp what it is. And right now we're starting to have numbers. And we're going through basic numbers. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through basic numbers shortly about the recession, 2008 recession, what people call the Great Recession. And then I'm going to dive right into the historical aspect of the Great Depression. Okay, 1929 Great Depression. And this is very important, not to just understand and statistics and graphs. This is not what I'm doing today. I'm going to talk about numbers, but I'm not going to do the graphs today. This is not, everybody's doing that. You don't need to hear me for that aspect. What is important is that you hear me, I believe, historical aspect. And we'll tell you the story of the Great Depression, how things unfolded. And it is so important to understand, and also interesting. And really, how do you say, mind-blowing what happened there. So we'll dive right into it. So first of all, a little bit of numbers. Let's start with that. Let's start with just to understand what this thing means. It's way too early to know, okay? I'm saying it again. It's way too early to know. I have my coffee here. For you guys in New York, it's now 8:30 in the morning. For you guys in Israel, it's 3:30 in the afternoon. For me, it's 3:30 in the afternoon. Most of us are at home, quarantined. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of numbers. So let's talk about, first of all, stock market, which is something I'm not going to dive into today. Everybody's talking about the stock market. This is the most interesting thing for everyone. But it's important to talk about it because it's the beginning of everything. It starts this ripple effect. Okay, so first of all, let's start with what happened right now. What happened right now? March, the Dow lost 24%. The S&P went down over 30. Now it went back up 12%. As per this date, we know what happened to the oil. Went under zero. Unprecedented things are happening here. And it's crazy because what happens with the oil right now is dragging again the stock market. Let's see when it opens up what's going to happen today. I'm very curious. Everybody's curious to know if it's going to go down again or up again, et cetera, et cetera. But we're seeing turmoils here in the stock market. Now, to go back to the Great Depression, what happened there? We all know what happened in 2008, which lost a tremendous amount of money. But the Great Depression, basically, by between 1929 and 1931, over 30%, meaning it came down to, some people say even 80%. But I'm saying the Dow went 30% in 1 month, down 30% in 1 month, meaning the panic that was there was crazy. And I'm going to talk about this in length. Let's talk about some more numbers, okay? Let's talk about some more numbers. The more numbers are unemployment. Unemployment before and after Great Depression. First, let's see where we are right now. Listen, we are at 3.5 unemployment on February. 3.5 unemployment. Listen to this, 3.5% unemployment. And this is unprecedented. Why? Because in February we had that, and then in 1929, prior to the collapse of 1921 in October, it was 3.2. Listen to this again, 3.2 unemployment prior to the collapse of the Great Depression, before the Great Depression, 1929. Okay, and by us, February, it's 3.5 unemployment. Post, we can't know what's going to be with us. We know where it's going pretty much, but we don't know the end of it. And nobody's a prophet here, but we know what happened in 1933. In 1933, it hit 24.9% unemployment. Okay, just to make it. To make you understand where we are going. Some people say we're already heading to 6, 7. People saying we're heading now to 20 and 30. Okay, that's where we're going to go in the next few months. Nobody saw the reports yet of all these major companies that what their aspect is, and we don't know that yet. So we're waiting to hear, and let's see what that brings to us. Okay, the GDP. Let's talk about the GDP. GDP, guys, is, let's see, Great Depression first. Great Depression first. It shrunk by 1930 to 8.5%. Okay. Then 1931, 6.4%. And then 1932, another 12.9%. Unprecedented, isn't it? Give me 1 second. I have to handle a little bit of, we're all in the house and we're all handling a quiet time, and I have the kids in the other room here. If you could please tell them to quiet down their videos and their stuff. Thank you. Okay. Call them back. Okay. All right. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. Here's what we have to talk about. Okay, so just to talk about GDP a little bit of our time, what's happening with the GDP now, coronavirus times? GDP coronavirus times is a very, very different aspect. Okay. GDP coronavirus times, we talked about. Bullard is talking about 50% drop in the GDP. Goldman Sachs is talking about 24% drop in the GDP. JP Morgan is talking about 14%. And Morgan Stanley is talking about 30%. No matter how you look at it, it's the worst thing we have seen in the past 74 years. It's unbelievable. And this is happening right now. Actually, today I saw something a bit more optimistic by who was it? BlackRock, I think. BlackRock, a little bit more optimistic, saying that this is really bad right now. And everything condensed into early in the game, but not really later in the game. Not really later in the game, and later in the game things are going to go a little better and and would not go as bad as in 2008. Okay. Now I would like to talk a little bit about 2008. What is the difference between 2008 and 1929? I heard a lot of experts, a lot of historians, and mainly I'm listening to Ray Dalio, who, in my opinion, is I recommend everybody to look at it. And what is the difference between a recession and a depression? A recession usually takes, it goes down for a year, maybe two, and then it starts going up. Usually a year, and then it starts going back. It takes the market about 4 years to get back to where it was. 3 years, 2.5 years, depends in the area, okay? Depression, there are not too many depressions out there, so it's very hard to learn from them, but we know what happened. The first depression was in 1873. 1873 depression was caused basically by the railroads. The railroads became a bubble. Everybody was investing in the railroads, and once it collapsed, everything collapsed. Once it collapsed, everything collapsed. Jobs were lost, and it went to a very bad depression, the worst at the time. But the 1921 was even greater, was even worse, and unprecedented, really. And the difference is that to get out of such a depression, 1929, it didn't come out really completely out of it and booming back into a great economy that we know in the 1950s. It did not happen until 1945. So this is what a depression is, and that's how bad it could be. What is really the difference? And I heard Ray Dalio speaks about, very interesting. Usually when it comes to a recession, what are the tools that the Fed have to deal with a recession? And the tools are basically take down interest rate and to start seeing how to bail out the markets. It's very different with what happened in 2008. Why? Because in 2008, the first thing was that first they used by taking obviously the interest rate down. But the one thing that was really different than now, and with what happened in 1929, is that the banks flopped. The banks were not doing the right thing. The banks were investing, and the major investment world was investing in CMBS, commercial mortgage-based securities, in all these this whole subprime thing happened in 2008. And when came out the Fed, I'm not getting into this whole thing. I recommend 2008 is something everybody talks about. Everybody knows what happened. Everybody's in economy or in business. Some people went through it themselves. It's close to us. It just happened. Meaning we're talking about 8 years ago. It's right here. It was, meaning 8 years ago. It was 12 years ago, and people know what happened. And I recommend to watch The Big Short. I watched it like 20 times. Every time I watch it, I learn something new that happened at that time. It's really interesting. This is not what we're going to dwell about. But then came out the Fed and bailed out the banks. Again, the Fed came out and bailed out the banks. The banks were investing in those bad mortgages. In the beginning, they had these bundles of good mortgages, and then they went and started investing in these bad mortgages. Okay, and once it all collapsed, it was a ripple effect that brought the whole market down. And even then, it brought the whole market down. But the bailout was to the banks. Came out the Fed and bailed out the banks again. In here, it's different. Coronavirus showed us a different type of crisis. The crisis, first of all, it's no one's fault, really. Obviously, the market was blown up. Everybody knows that. But the bubble was, it was a general bubble. It was not a specific thing like the subprime. Whoever was hurt from this whole thing are small, medium businesses. Small businesses are they are the driver of the economy. Everything is small businesses. Some people say big companies, right? They give a lot of jobs, but small business is the main part of and they are all shut down now. So what was the next thing that you could learn from to understand what happens when small businesses, close down or shut down or in trouble? What do you do? The next thing that you can learn from is 1929. Okay, there are many, many collapses. There are many recessions. There are many things that happened in the past. But okay, the one thing that, and that's what Ray Dalio is speaking about, that's what I heard from him, is that you take, the difference is that the bailout is in such an unprecedented way that the bank is starting to print money, And that's what we're seeing right now. The banks, the Fed started to print money. And the idea is that the government is creating bonds for having money for the public, to give them stimulus packages, to give them unemployment, to give them all kind of monies to save small businesses, to save the public, to give homes, to give people who don't have, or everybody who at this point everybody's at home, to give them something so they can get by. How do they do that? They create bonds, and the Fed buys bonds. Again, the government creates a bond in order to help the people. The Fed buys the bonds, give the government the money, and that's how this thing is created. All the while they print money. If this whole thing is happening in a balanced way, it could happen. It could be very nice, and everything can get back faster than, faster than later, sooner than later. And that is very important. L'chaim, everybody. Now, let's dwell a little bit in what happened really in 1929 versus this time. And that's where the difference probably is. I don't know that. We don't know how bad it is. But the government at this time, at this point, is acting, whatever your political aspect is, it's not as bad as 1929. I'm going to talk about it in a second. The government acted much faster. Maybe not fast enough, you would say, but much faster than what happened in 1929. Let's get into it. Let's get into the historical aspect of this whole thing. It's really mind-boggling. In order to understand let's dive into it. By the way, this is, I think, most interesting. You will find it very, very interesting. That's what I believe. And in order to understand the 1929 crisis, depression, we have to understand what happened previous to that. We have to understand what happened from between 1921 to 1929. What happened? So this is a good time. This was like this flourishing euphoria was all over the place. But if I want to put the point on it, first of all, there were a few bad things. Every period of time, every decade has some bad things. The bad things were you had some gangsters, you had the prohibition on the alcohol. These were the bad things, especially considering we had Kiddush the Shabbos and we had some Al-Chaim, as we call it. But the booming part of 1920 and 1929 was economy that is booming like never before post-World War I. Okay. Second thing, all these fun things that happen that are happening in America happened then. What? For example, the competition of Miss America, the Oscars started at 1921 to 1929. The jazz was like at its peak. It was, and all those movies became, you had audio to the movies. It all started in 1921 to 1929, all these things. And people were at their top of euphoria and fun and happy. People bought cars like never before because prior to the 20s, only the rich guys, only the top, people in the economy, only the top 1% could afford cars. And then came Henry Ford and made it affordable for everybody to buy cars, and people started buying cars. And the interesting part of it was that people started taking loans in order to buy cars. Sounds familiar? Banks established the concept of credit to the small person, to the everyday person. Everyone got credit. What did they use the credit for? Buying cars. Use the credit for something that you would find surprised, but it happened in 1921 to 1929. People got credit from the banks in order to invest in the stock exchange. And that changed everything. Why? Because people got all those credits. By the way, just one item, just to make you understand, going back to the cars aspect, to make you understand the boom of the 20s. Prior to the 20s, in 1919, America had 6 million cars. Okay? 1929, 27 million cars. Just to make you understand what happened in that period of time. Okay? Now, the main part is the euphoria that was around the stock exchange. Okay? Wall Street. Unlike every other place in Europe at that time, that only the highest ranked, the people with the heavier, deeper pockets came and invested in the stock exchange. In America, came out the concept everybody can be rich. Everyone can get rich by investing in the stock exchange. Everybody came and everybody did it, and it became a trend. Everybody was taking loans in order to do that. It was the thing that was, they had this bubbly thing. It's called the ticker taker. I forgot what the real name is. Ticker takes, whatever. This bubbly thing that came, all these little slips of paper came out of it, and people could know. It's like today we have those screens that show, the Bloomberg screens, MSNBC. We saw the little lines where the stock exchange is going. Then they had this little piece of paper coming out of this bubbly glass thing, and that's how they knew where the stock exchange is going. They had that in every store, barbershop, I don't know where. They have it in every store, and every Joe Schmo can just invest. And that's how people started investing. They took and they leveraged in a way that was never before. They took and they put as low as 10%, and sometimes even less than that. And the banks gave them the rest in order to put your money there. It's going to get back. Brokers started going crazy and gave credits to people and said, pay me later. Just put in. I'll invest for you. And the euphoria went on and on and on and on. And and just to make you understand a little bit of numbers to see how crazy things got, the Dow went in 5 years from 100 to 400, different obviously numbers than today, but from 100 to 400, 4 times its value in 5 years. Okay, people thought they're going to get rich, and it was crazy. Now, everybody wanted a part of it. It was like sports. Everybody wanted to be a part of this whole craziness of investing. It was like sports, and whoever really got into it was the middle class. Okay, higher class, they always were in the game. They were always buying stocks. It was not accessible to the middle class. The middle class got into it until they got into it. The poor people stayed all in the same, meaning the lower class were never getting into it. And the new president is coming into the game. Who's the new president? Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover is coming into the game. And his ticket is, his slogan is, prosperity is just around the corner. Imagine that. So 1929, the stock market is booming. He's booming like never before. And he's coming with prosperity is just around the corner. He got everybody's attention, and he was elected. He became president in 1929, unknowing what he's getting into, unknowing what will happen, what will unfold in the next couple of months. Okay? And that's what happened. And everybody knows that there's a bubble. Everybody who has some eyes, in his, in his head is saying there's a bubble. Something's happening, but the media is different, and I'm going to talk about it soon. And there's no social media, and the experts are not, everybody that was coming out and saying there's trouble is coming. Everybody shut them down. Didn't let them talk. It's different. You're talking about a different time, a different life. Everything is not the same, and as it is today. And everybody's still in euphoria. And the president is saying it's beautiful, it's wonderful, and it's unbelievable. Not only that, but in the summer of 1929, where everybody goes away, July, August, everybody's going for vacations. Usually, the stock market goes down a little bit. It went even up higher. It went even up higher, after Herbert Hoover got elected, and the insanity went on and on and on and on. Okay, now everything blows up. Black October 24th, Black Thursday. Everybody knows what it is. The stock market collapse. Okay, collapse, everything blows up. No one was there to close down Wall Street. No one was there. even the president of Wall Street was at vacation in Hawaii. There was no one there in order to get things done. So we are getting into a craziness and a loss. The loss was $30 billion, which was basically 10 times the budget of the Fed at that time. Again, $30 billion, 1929, 10 times the budget of the Fed. That collapsed, okay? It all collapsed. And it was more of all the expenses altogether what America put out as expense for World War I, just to make you understand the magnitude of this collapse, okay? That's what happened at that time of 1929, October, okay? Now, even people, now you have to understand, even today, the computer is not fast enough and we complain, right? We like to complain. Oh, it's not fast enough. I sold it. We have these stop orders and limits, stop limit, all these things that we have. Great. At that time, you didn't have that. You had a much slower communication system. You know, you didn't have what you have today. And what people, they saw this ticket taker and it broke down because people saw what they saw at a certain given time. And they said, okay, I want to sell. What they sold at 2 o'clock could be for tomorrow. It could be not relevant at all. Nothing worked properly and everything fed itself because once everybody saw what happened, if they sold yesterday and it happened a few hours after or a day after, whatever it happened, because it was like a bottleneck. Nobody could get there on time and to sell on time. That fed itself because people then saw it later on and then they started selling it and things got worse and worse and worse. And it became like a snowball, it's a ripple effect of no equal. Okay? There's a legend about the time of the Depression about people jumping out of roofs and stockbrokers, etc. It did happen, but when I read historians, they say that it was vast exaggerated. They say that it definitely did not happen the way it was. You know, people talk about. It wasn't in that magnitude. The movies at that time, they make it much bigger than it was. Everybody's jumping out of the roofs. That did not happen. But definitely there are stories about people who committed suicide. There's a story about Winston Churchill, who was not a president, who was not a prime minister of UK at that time, who visited New York, and in his hotel where he was, a stockbroker jumped. So that's a story that did happen, but I'm saying it wasn't as crazy as people say it was, that everybody was jumping, but it was pretty bad, okay? So moving to the next thing, what did the president do about it? Not much. That is the major difference between what's happening today and then. The coronavirus pandemic, whether, again, you like what the administration, what they do or not, that's one thing. But things are being done. The president cannot not do anything. He goes out to the media and he acts, and they have these stimulus packages coming out, whether they're enough or not, but they're coming out in a major way early, and that is important. It did not happen in 1929. It did not happen. Herbert Hoover did pretty much nothing, okay? He did pretty much nothing, and he says things will get better. Now, you have to understand, due to the fact that everything happens much slower and the ripple effect is continuing, but it's not happening fast enough, the news, people don't know it early enough. And what happens is that when he gets to the media and says, things will get better, everybody hears it maybe a day after, by the news, then the effect comes another day after. It doesn't come as fast as today. And things are getting worse and worse, and Herbert Hoover is losing the confidence of the crowd, confidence of the public, and things are getting worse and worse. Now, there was a scene outside the stock market. And of people congregating outside of Wall Street. They didn't do anything, didn't hurt anyone. There were no riots at that point in time. But people felt that Wall Street became such a focus. People stood just right outside for weeks, just waiting for something to happen because they were so concerned about what is happening that became crazy. And everything went down and down and down, and everything got worse and worse and worse. And the worst thing of this whole scenario is that banks started to go bankrupt. The banks started to lose everything. And that was really bad because people lost their confidence in the banks. The banks gave tremendous amount of credits, which cannot be paid back by people who lost their money, especially on the stock exchange. And then the banks started getting stingy. People got nervous that some banks are getting in trouble, and it caused a ripple effect again, that people came and took out the money from the bank, which made the bank even less, there's how do you say, their ability to stand this crisis was very small, and they couldn't do it. That got really, really bad, and many banks went bankrupt, and really was really bad. The Fed is not putting out enough money for the banks to survive, and things are getting worse and worse, and it's not really getting to the favor of anyone. So how does it work, this whole ripple effect? One, there's no credit, no money. People can't buy homes. People who wanted to buy homes and wanted to take mortgages for homes cannot buy homes anymore. That stopped. There's no money for businesses, okay? No money for businesses. Businesses cannot pay their suppliers. They cannot pay their employees. And it goes on. And the employees cannot pay for whatever they have to pay. No consumer. There's no transactions. Economy is made by transactions. There's no commerce. Everything starts to die down. And it all takes time. It's not happening in one day. And that is one difference that we have today than it was then. Then it took, first it was the stock market, and then slowly it went to the market, went to the banks, went et cetera, et cetera. It was a ripple effect that happens within months. With us, within days, it was just boom. Why? Because coronavirus shut every business down just like that. So it's very different. That's why there are differences between that and then. But it was the hit was on businesses, on small businesses. And that's exactly what's happening today. That is the thing that also Ray Dalio and other experts are talking about. The same parts that are happening then are happening now. It was not the banks like 2008, like I said. Some cities experience foreclosures. Up to 60% of foreclosures on the real estate. Okay, people lost everything. And now, here's the thing. The people who are poor, they didn't care much. They were poor now, they were poor then. Doesn't matter. They didn't have jobs, they were homeless, or they had very little. They had very little then, they had very little now. They had to compete for the dollar more than it was, but they didn't feel the difference in such a huge way. The rich people, the people who had so much, lost a lot of money. They lost a lot of money. But sometimes up to, and I'm going to talk about Rockefeller in a second, but some of them lost up to, let's say, 80%. It's unprecedented. But they were still able to live in the same lifestyle they lived before, okay? Because their businesses were damaged in an unprecedented way, and they had to lay off people, but they personally still had that business existing, and they had their own personal life going okay. They didn't have to sell their home. They could have a few homes. Maybe they sold one of their homes or something like that. Or they didn't buy whatever they had to buy in order to expand the way they wanted to expand, but they still had their lives. Who got hurt the most? The middle class. The middle class was wiped out. 1929 up to pre-World War II, the middle class was almost wiped out completely. That was the unprecedented part of 1929 Depression. Okay, that was really bad. Now about John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller was already above 90. Okay, it was one of the parts, and I'm probably in a different video. I'm going to speak about those titans. Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. Ford, don't like to speak about him much. He's an anti-Semite, but J.P. Morgan, Vanderbilt, all these people who, so-called built America with their entrepreneurship and stuff and changed the world since, they all died. And the only one who stays, I think Ford was still alive, but the only one who stays out of those titans beforehand was John D. Rockefeller, was above 90, which life expectancy, I don't know how he kept alive so much. I don't know why he ate, but it was unbelievable. Anyways, he's the richest man in the world at that time. And he comes out to the media after that collapse. And you can see the video, by the way, on YouTube. It's great, meaning it's amazing. I love seeing old videos. It was a different world then. And you see John D. Rockefeller, old man, this tall, skinny guy, comes out in the media and he says, I've seen depressions come and go, and there's always prosperity after that. He was not wrong, but he was hoping, I'm assuming, that things will come up. And he wants to show the stock market some trust, and he starts buying stocks like crazy. He buys, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help at that moment and at that point of time. People are not joining in. People are not jumping ship. They're not coming in. They're not joining. They're not buying. People are in panic. People are in panic. That's what happens. So it didn't help at all. And again, the middle class is being wiped out. An international aspect I'd like to talk about. Comes out Herbert Hoover and did something that, in many opinions, was this something that changed the world. Herbert comes out to the media and says, we are stopping the support to Germany. We're stopping the financial support to Germany. That's what he said, Herbert Hoover. We just, yes, Yom HaShoah here, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. That's what Herbert Hoover said. And many interpreters say that was the trigger that brought the World War II. How? Because the economy in Germany was already bad, and that's why they needed support, because post-World War I, they're in trouble. They are in major trouble. L'chaim. Major trouble. And they are dependent on this support that America is giving them. And all of a sudden comes Herbert Hoover and says, I'm not giving you that support. You are not getting the money. You're not getting it. I'm not helping you. And at that point, Germany goes down to a place where they weren't for many years. Things go really bad. They get really awful. And at that point, the socialism, parties coming out, communists are coming, all the parties, democracy basically is being destroyed by that act. Okay? And just to make you understand, Hitler had very little support in 1929, very little support, and his party was not even close to be elected. And then 1933, he's elected to be the chancellor of Germany. It's unbelievable. Same effect happens to France, and they get down to 25. Europe became a place with 25%. Unemployment rate. Now, I had a lot of people. I gave this same video right here that I'm giving now. I did in Israel a few days ago, and some people watched live, some people went off and watched it later. But I got some comments, and one of the people is asking me, "You live in Israel. Why do you talk about America? Why do you talk about the U.S. economy? When you live in Israel, we have our problems here, etc." First of all, I work in America. Okay, I work in the U.S. I work in real estate in the U.S. That's my focus. That's one. The second thing is, look what happened in 2008. I told them 2008 was not a crisis that was related to some places in Europe had their own issues. Greece, Italy, etc. But I'm saying in general, the subprime crisis was in America. That's what happened. The banks in America defaulted. That's what happened. Okay? And the Fed came in to help them. And then the recession happened, etc., etc. It did not happen, especially not in Israel. In Israel, the banks were very responsible. But that's what happens. And you learn from every crisis that was with serious magnitude that America brought the world down. The center of the world economy is in the US, in New York. And when something happens that is in serious magnitude in the stock exchange, it brings down the economy all over the world. And that's what happened here. And as I said, it brought Germany and brought Hitler to rule this whole crisis. And we know what happened later. Going back to 1930 in America, America fell into a recession at that point. It's not a depression yet, it's a recession. And the GDP goes down 50%. And at that point starts a ripple effect that brings to a depression. Okay, 50%. People, what does that mean? What does that really mean to, when you say, okay, percentage, what does that mean in people? It means that people are going down to the streets. They don't have jobs, and they're starting to stand in line to get some soup because they don't have the money to buy food. Okay. In June, there's usually of 1930, June, there's usually at that time of spring, the summer, usually the stock market goes down. But June usually is a time of everything goes up because there's like springtime and everything is like, a lot of it has to do with human nature and behavior. And people in June usually buy stocks usually the stock market goes up. What happened in June was the stock market went even lower and lower, went down and down and down. And by October, it wasn't until October 1930 that the country got into a depression. Okay? Now, what is a depression? A depression is the most depressing thing you could think of. Okay? Other than a war, it's, I think, one of the worst things. I'm going to tell you a few things I read about, saw, looked at movies, listened to historians, some horrible stuff. And if we need to get ready for something like that, I really hope not. And I have a feeling it's not going to be as bad. But you know what? We have to get ready for anything because crazy thing that is happening out there, we have to be ready for anything. Okay? What did happen? First of all, 1 out of 5 people is unemployed. 1 out of 5 people is unemployed in the US. People cannot survive and they're looking for food in the streets. They're looking for any single type of job. If you saw Cinderella Man, that'll give you a little bit of an aspect of what happened. People looking for the dollar so they can buy 1 or 2 things so they can survive just today or now. The government, again, is not giving anything at that time. There's no unemployment. There's no Social Security. That did not come until later. By the way, I'm going to talk about it. When Roosevelt came along, that's when the Social Security came along. We're going to talk about it. But there's no Social Security at that point in 1930. Everything is really bad. Due to the fact that the government is not helping in a tremendous way, or is not helping at all, some might say, the charity organizations are collapsing. Charity organizations are collapsing. They don't have enough money in order to give people standing in line that don't have enough funds. And that became really bad. And I saw a video of a person who remembers his mother standing in line for food, being embarrassed, standing in line for food, and he's right there. And he remembers it very vividly. Obviously, we don't have much people today to talk about those things, just like we don't have people to talk about the Holocaust, which happened later, okay? Definitely we don't have people to talk about today, but there are some recordings of people that spoke, old people from several years ago who are not with us today, who spoke about this and described those things. So this guy is telling about his mother standing in line for food, telling that his father lost his job, and he's seeing him as a child. He goes to school, and he sees his father's in the street, he sees his father in the streets selling ties, and he's embarrassed. And today he's thinking about it, and he's embarrassed by himself, being embarrassed, being ashamed of his dad. Some horrible things. And then the same guy says his father went to clean windows, and he falls and he gets hurt, and bad things happen. And people went out to the streets, start looking for themselves. What am I going to do? What's my next move? What am I going to be busy with? What's my next job? Some people were so embarrassed they wore ties and suit and hat that they had at that back in the day, and they go out to the street because they are embarrassed to tell their families they lost their jobs, and they're going out and they're doing the same thing, and things got really, really bad. One thing that struck me was the competitions. There were dance competitions that were created during the Depression. One of the dance competitions, something really horrible. Couples came out, and some people made money out of this. They took out and they said, we make a competition. Whoever stays standing last is getting a reward of $500, which was a lot of money back then. And young people came out, man and wife usually, and they came out and they danced, and the idea is last man standing. People for days are standing. There are videos of that. It's horrible. You see people collapsing, a person holding his wife like a dead person, and she's trying to still make her dance. They brought the upside of this whole thing, that they brought beds, doctors, soups, so people can at least they have something to eat if they go there. But it was pretty horrific. You see the pictures there, and it's horrible, okay? And that's what people did. Those people who came in, I guess, 2 cents. Those people who danced wanted to get to the $500 in order to survive. But at least if they did, they got some food. Horrible things. Another picture that is becoming very, very, something that everybody sees. Properties in the streets. People get foreclosed. They get out of their homes, and all their belongings are in the street. And a lot of fights with cops, with police officers that are trying to evacuate them from their homes, and they're fighting, trying to stay. Horrible, horrible things. And a lot of scenery of people with their belongings in the street. Don't know where to go, don't know what to do, and they just lost everything. And they don't know where to move with their stuff. They're just stuck. And that's another picture that was done in the Depression. So a lot of people ask, okay, what did they do with their belongings after they were thrown out of their homes? And that was a concept that was, I would say, the mark of the Depression. The mark of the Depression is called Hooverville. The Hoovervilles, many of you maybe learned in school in history, the Hoovervilles are those huts and homes that people built. They went to all kind of places, public areas like Central Park, like I don't know where, and they just put all these huts, and they were called Hoovervilles after they were mocking the president, Herbert Hoover, because he didn't do anything. So they went and they put those huts over there and those shags over there, and they called it Hooverville. Okay, and there were many, many Hoovervilles all over the place. People in tin huts, and they're sitting there, and there are videos of that, and it's horrible. I can't imagine how people took showers, went to the bathroom, horrible stuff. Okay, and as bad as you think this got, in urban areas, it was not as bad. Even though it was horrible, it was not as bad as in rural areas. Farmers got it worse. And I hear it today, and it's starting to reflect. I know it's not the same reason oftentimes, but it's because of the corona. But then people could not afford to buy from the farmers their produce. Okay, and what happened? They started spilling the milk, spilling their stuff, their crops and everything. And therefore, farmers are starting to lose their lands. They can't pay, they can't handle it, they lose their lands, they're starting to get out. And there was a huge sense of homelessness at the time. Why? Because if in the urban areas people went to the Hoovervilles and built those huts and went there, then people in those out of town areas, the farmers, they just lost their land, and there was They were getting into, their cars or their wagons or whatever they had, and they started going and driving around. It was like the sense of wandering around, looking for where are we going to go next? What are we going to do next? It was pretty horrible. It was really, really, really bad. And that's what happened at that time. The paradox, the irony of this whole thing was that having people lose their homes, can't pay rent, can't pay their mortgage, and at the same time having landlords, banks, not being able to fill that home or sell that home because nobody else has money to buy it or rent it. So we had, on one hand, you had people outside in the street in the Hoovervilles or just wandering around. And then you had those empty condos or empty homes. People, so it was a crazy, crazy situation. Crazy situation. Steel was, had become at that time such a major thing. It built America. It built America vertically. And 1929 to 1933 went down 10%, meaning 10% activity that was there before. People lost their jobs. People didn't buy. There was no more construction, pretty much. 10% of the activity. There was 10% of the activity. All these riots, people took it to the streets. That Ray Dalio talks about. That's a sign of a depression is when people take it to the street. People take it and go to the street, and socialism. All these fights in the streets and communism. All these parties are coming out. At that time, the KKK came out. All these anti-Semite parties, all these hater parties, even you had Nazis in New York. They had all kind of events there. It was prior to World War II, of course, but they had all kind of things going on. The Depression brought out people to question democracy. That's what happens when you have those things. And this is really, really awful and bad. And just to make an example, Ford Company had 130,000 workers. They let go, and they stayed with 37,000 workers. Now, what happened is that these guys were used to get paid $50. They got down to $16 and took it to the street. Police came out, shootings, people die, people get injured. Really, really horrible. But I think that the worst scenery was in Washington. The worst scenery in Washington, there was a scenery of war veterans from World War I that were supposed to get their pension or their payments, etc. And all of a sudden they don't get their money because the government doesn't have any more. And they made a petition to the Congress, and the Congress says, you're not getting anything. You're not getting anything. We're not giving you anything. It's bad. And people started, on their own to make their way to Washington, to go and protest and to show their, and to come and to, to stand there and to try to get back whatever belongs to them. And people came with their families, whoever could, and they stood there for days. And some people went back home, but those who stayed there came out. Herbert Hoover and made the worst move. He took two people. One of them was Eisenhower, who later on became president, and they have decided to go and fight against those people. They came peacefully, and the impression that he got was that they are coming to danger the government or whatever it was. He took out the National Guard or I can't remember what it was, National Guard or the Army, and brought tanks and whatever and whatnot. They started shooting at them. And these guys, a lot of people died. Children got injured and died. I don't know what happened there completely, but 13,000 people came there. And it was pretty bad and horrible. At that point, that was the point, by the way, that Herbert Hoover lost completely the trust of the crowd. He had almost nothing left, but whatever he had left, he lost it, and therefore was brought later for him to lose the presidency completely. America is looking for new leadership. Leadership is not doing anything, and things are really bad. And what is happening next? 1 second, give me 1 second, something here fell. What happened next is Franklin D. Roosevelt, one of the greatest presidents America had. We know him, Jewish people know him also as the story of all the rabbis standing down in Washington, the stairs there, trying to convince him to go to war into Germany, and he doesn't do anything, not until later. And therefore, we have, the criticism on him is, meaning on one hand, grateful that he finally went and did whatever he did. But prior, it did not move while people were dying. So many people could be saved. But Franklin D. Roosevelt, as per America, was a great president. And everybody was running for him. Why? He was the mayor of New York. He was the governor of New York. We're now used to seeing Cuomo coming out of to the media every now and then. Came out Franklin D. Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt is perceived as a hero because in New York, he did a lot of moves that obviously Herbert Hoover was the president, but he tried internally to do a lot of things that were perceived as very positive. He was very attached to the crowd, to what happens with the people. He came from a very rich background, but his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, she was very into chesed, what we call in charity. She was out there and trying to help all the time. And Eleanor, I guess, brought him the realities that are happening out there, the Hoovervilles and everything else that is happening, in the streets, and calms out Roosevelt, and he runs for president and he wins the presidency. Everybody waited for him. Everybody wanted him to come. Everybody waited for like so to speak, a savior, to come and they wrote a song to him, come and help us and save us, etc., etc. He was July 2nd, 1930, elected as president. Later on, came into the White House. And his slogan was, his ticket to come in and get the president was two things. One is the New Deal, which I'm going to speak about. And the second thing is the alcohol. People say that bring back the alcohol. People said that this what was the main thing, because many people don't understand what the aspect of what the New Deal is and the details of it at the time. Especially at that time, especially the uneducated, but the alcohol, everybody understands, including myself. I won't have the whiskey I had here, was really something that got him to come back and be president and change everything. But what he really did is incredible. Franklin Roosevelt changed everything. So we're talking about 1929, 1930, the country falls into a depression. 1929 is the collapse. The recession is up to 1930 October, depression, and then it goes downhill until 1932, where Franklin D. Roosevelt comes. Just to make you understand the magnitude of this thing. 2008, the recession was harsh, really, really harsh. A lot of people lost a lot of money. The pull down, the downturn, everything went down until 2009, pretty much. By 2009, everything was rock bottom, and then it started going up. So a year, if some people, 2007, let's say, the whole started to collapse. By 2009, everything started to go up. In the Great Depression, 1929 until 1932, think how much time it is. Things went down and down and more down and more down and more down. By 1933, everything was rock bottom. So it takes in depression, it takes about 3 to 4 years to go down, not to go back up where it was, to go down. And then it started to climb back up. The economy was rock bottom. And at the same time, Roosevelt comes. Of course, Hitler is being elected. I'm not going to talk about that. What I want to talk about, first of all, when Roosevelt came, people were still, the socialism and the communism, all these parties were starting to build up. It took time until he got started with everything, and there were a few assassination attempts. One did not succeed, of course, and the irony was the Chicago mayor at that time went up to the stage and said, "Thank God that Franklin D. Roosevelt was spared," and he gets shot and he gets killed, and that's the environment at that time. Really, really harsh. The major thing, and I'm going to talk about the New Deal in a second. The major thing Franklin D. Roosevelt has done, the major thing was he closed the banks. I think he did it in 1933. I forgot already the date. October. I forgot the date. I wrote it down somewhere. I think the date was in 1933, 1932. I think in 1933. I think October 1933. Franklin D. Roosevelt closed the banks. Or March. Forgot. Mind. Spare me on that one. You can look it up later on. Franklin D. Roosevelt made a move that was unprecedented. He closed the banks and reopened them. He didn't do it in a way that I'm closing the banks. He didn't say it that way. He said it in a very interesting and very smart way. He said, I'm closing the banks and I'm opening up only the ones that are suitable, reliable, sound financially, and that the public can rely on, because he wanted to bring the trust, the public to trust in the banks. That's what he wanted to do. And it works. And at that point, when it happens, when he closed down and he opens up only the banks that are sound, and he makes new regulations, new rules, everything that works properly, which was opposed to the pre-1929 saga, how the banks worked, etc. He made all kind of rules, and the economy is back in action. Obviously gradually, but that was the point that ended the Great Depression. Okay, and that's where everything starts growing up. Not only that, but if you recall, the dollar was attached to the gold. The value of the dollar was attached to the gold. Not until 1971, when Nixon decided to separate the gold from the dollar, which many say was a miserable mistake. But they say that every single day, in order to make the economy, get the economy going, Franklin D. Roosevelt did things that were, some people say today, that were just insane. But I guess that sometimes you have to be crazy. I don't know if you know who is president today. Sometimes in order to get things done properly, you got to be a little crazy. You got to be a little crazy, and you got to be a little bit, how do you say, unorthodox. And what he did was crazy. Every day he came and he decided what the value of the dollar, of the gold, would be, which is something, it's crazy to say, but that's what he did. So he came out, there's a sort of a legend that he came out one day and he said, hey, let's bring it from 7 to 21, the dollar. And people ask him why. He said, because 3 times 7 is 21 and 3 is a lucky number. And that's how we changed the economy. People started buying. People started to get. Commerce went back. Transactions came back, and everything came back. The economy came back in action, and that's what he did. People got back to work. The factories got reopened, and everything changed at that point. Everything changed at that point. It takes Joseph Kennedy, either the grandfather or father of John Kennedy, of the President Kennedy, who died later on, but Joseph Kennedy had all kind of, I would say, mischief had done at the time of 1929, but he still took him to be the head of the SEC, and was, some people say, was a very smart move, because you took the guy who knows all the tricks to become there and to create all the rules that need to be created. And to protect public from such depressions and recessions as much as possible, of course. What was the good thing that came out, and that Ray Dalio speaks about it a lot. The new thing that came out is called the New World Order. A New World Order, it means that everything changes. And that's what Franklin D. Roosevelt did with the New Deal. The New Deal brought Social Security, which was established in 1935. Yes, there was no Social Security prior to that. Can you imagine? People did not get Social Security. It didn't happen at that. Unemployment didn't happen. All these things were established post-Depression. That's when Franklin D. Roosevelt came and changed all these things and started to get things happen. Whatever didn't work, he tried until it worked. He wanted to see the things and the economy is getting back in action. There were two phases. Minimum wage also, by the way, was created back then. There were two phases for that New Deal, quote unquote. One was immediately when he was elected, he started to get it going. And the other phase was in 1936, 1937. That time, that one worked less and brought another recession later on, which was not a perfect thing. Also, another thing that didn't work for Franklin D. Roosevelt was the farmers. It did not work for the farmers. It did not work for, they didn't like what he did. They didn't understand his aspects. He didn't understand them. And the low prices of their crops didn't help him at all. And they did not recover. The economy did recover. It took them a lot longer to recover at that time. Those actions that he had done did not help the farmers. There were still states that did not, grow, did not get out. They couldn't get out of the Depression. For example, California had state troopers that, on the roads and in the interstate, standing there and not letting people into California. People were wandering around, as I said, and they did not let them in order not to bring more problems into California. It was crazy times, really. Another thing that was not so positive at the time in relation to Franklin D. Roosevelt, the New Deal Phase 2, which happened, was the unions. The unions were a great idea to create unions, which basically were created within, but he created unions in an official fashion, like we have them today, pretty much. But the unions that the workers have created started fighting against those unions. It didn't work really well, and that did not work. And all these things brought to a recession back in 1937. I guess also he did a lot of great things by ending the Depression. He put out money into the public and brought in all these what they needed in order to get out of that state and to have the market come back into action, and to have people go back to work, and to have the factories reopen, the banks functioning, and everything, and credit being reinstalled. He did that. That worked. But there are a few things that didn't work, and I guess, the way the money was divided between certain times to the later time brought a recession in 1937 again. Of course, not as bad as it was before. It was a recession again. And again, some unemployment came into the play. You would be surprised to ask, for you, meaning who know history and are researchers of history, would know. For me, it was interesting to learn it just recently. What brought back the economy and the recession plus depression, everything ended, okay? Obviously, it did not end until 1945, okay? 1945, post-World War, everything got back, people got back, 1950s, the birth of suburbia, and everything started roaring up, and everything became amazing and incredible. But to put the point on what is really the issue that brought back the economy or ended the recession, World War II. Pre-World War II changed everything. How? It just did. You need to create the war machines, whatever needed to be done, guns, missiles, everything that needed to be created for the Air Force, and people were needed to go back to work and create all these things. Also, you had less people out there looking for jobs because men were starting to be, recruited to the army. So you had less people in the street. The ask and demand, supply and demand was different. you had a lot more jobs, a lot less people. And that's what happened. That's brought the economy back. This is the story of the 1921 to 1929 depression. And I just want to recap for a second. Recap how historically things were unfolded very quickly. 1929, stock market goes down. Only later, banks started getting hit. Months later, banks are hit. Later, small businesses are hit, foreclosures, the Hoovervilles, and the depression doesn't kick in until 1930. Depression. By 1933, it was still in that state. Franklin D Roosevelt was elected in 1932, got into the White House later on. At that point, when the banks got back was 1933. So you're talking about that period of time of how things happen slowly and gradually are declining and declining while everybody's hoping and thinking everything will get better. We are so hopeful that this is not what we're looking at, but a lot of experts are saying that a lot of things are so similar. At the same time, other experts are saying things are not so similar. Things are different. So what we are hoping is that first of all, the governments will do the right thing for their countries. Will put their hand deep in the pocket and give it to the public the way they have to give it. It's not great to print money. It's not great to do those things. It's not a positive thing. But the actions to save the economy must be done earlier than later. Okay? The new world order has to be created earlier than later. Also, another thing, a major part of this whole thing that Ray Dalio, this is something that really struck me, and this is something that one thing that you don't want to have is that people start fighting one against another. You want people to work together. You want people to help each other. This is in our power to resolve. It's not completely in our power, but just a few days ago, there was here in Israel, at least, a person came out in the news. It was on social media, and he was crying, saying that he can't sell falafel. Okay, he can't sell falafel, and then everybody got in. People started, flooding the area, buying falafel from him. And all he said, all I want is I just want to get back to work. I don't want charity. I just want to work. And if we have that, good aspect within us, we have this goodness, this good nature within us to help one another, this is the most powerful thing we can have in order to get out of any trouble that we are in. And with that, I wish you guys, I hope you enjoyed this historical, I would say, overview of the Great Depression. I wish you well. I wish all of us to get out of this very, very soon. Take care of yourselves. Have a beautiful rest of the day. Bye.